Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Inclusion Coach. My name's Rebecca, and I am your Inclusion Coach. This week, we're talking about unconscious bias. Now, depending on your perspective, unconscious bias is the initial awakening that allows you to build your inclusive mindset, or it's a pesky lefty woke fallacy to make everybody in the world feel bad about themselves. You won't be surprised to hear that I lean towards the former. I think that understanding unconscious bias helps us to be in control of our decisions rather than our unconscious brain being in control of them. Today, I'm going to demystify unconscious bias and explain how we can use our knowledge of it to be more inclusive in our thoughts and our actions. Our brains are bombarded with millions of stimuli every day. Right now, your brain is processing what your eyes are seeing, what your ears are hearing, perhaps the taste of that last coffee you had, the sensation of your skin in your clothes and against your seat. And on top of that, it's keeping our heart beating, our lungs breathing, and the various different systems, digestive, immune, nervous systems, all working as they should. That's a lot. So our brain learns to take shortcuts to filter all of these millions of stimuli that we're bombarded with every day. Depending on our environment, where and how we were brought up, our education, our friends, the people in our life who influence us, the media that we surround ourselves with, all of these are taken in by our subconscious brain. It categorizes and it filters all our life experiences to help us form opinions, make decisions, take actions, or not. It's so good at doing this that our subconscious brain takes care of about 95% of our thinking. Even when we think we have thought something through objectively, rationally, from first principles, our helpful brain has been making mental shortcuts to help us arrive at the decision we've made. But those mental shortcuts are not so helpful when they mean that we make untrue assumptions about people or situations that make us treat people differently. So here's just a few examples of how unconscious bias can show up. First of all, racial bias. Lots of research been done into this, in particular the experience of candidates applying for roles. So somebody with an African or Asian sounding name could put their CV forward for a vacancy under their own name and under an Anglican sounding name. And guess what? They're far more likely to be called for interview with the Anglican sounding name and rejected with the African or Asian sounding name. Gender bias, these are the stereotypical assumptions that we make about people based on their gender, what they're particularly good at or bad at. So at work, this might show up with women being expected to wash the cups after a meeting or take the notes or do the kind of housekeeping things. Age bias is the assumptions that we make about people's capability to do or understand something based on their age. What you might hear or what you might find yourself thinking is, oh, they're too young, they're too old for that. Disability bias is the assumption that a physical or a neurodiversity may prevent somebody from doing a job to its fullest. Then we have class bias. This is where we might judge somebody unconsciously on their accent or the way they're dressed. It can be as subtle as the colour of shoes that somebody is wearing. Then we have weight bias. This is the assumption about people purely based on their weight. For example, somebody who's perceived to be overweight, what might come into question is, oh, are they going to have any self-discipline? And finally, this is kind of a catch-all, affinity bias. This is our brain's natural propensity to want to be around people who are like us, who think like us. And applying affinity bias, knowingly or unknowingly, creates the homogeneity that I was talking about in my last video. Nobody is exempt or immune from unconscious bias. Intelligence has nothing to do with it. If you have a brain, you have unconscious bias. And the bad news is we can't overcome unconscious bias It's deeply ingrained. It's been there all our lives. The good news is that we can factor it in when we're forming opinions or making decisions. By being self-aware, by accepting that we all have unconscious bias, we can check ourselves. We can check our opinions. We can check our decisions and think, is there any bias in here? And we can ask other people to help us with this, especially when we're making decisions or taking actions that impact on other people at work or in our family or friendship group. If you're curious about your own unconscious bias, you can take the Harvard Implicit Bias Test. There's a link to it in the notes below. It's completely anonymous, and it's the biggest unconscious bias testing instrument in the world. You may be surprised at the results when you do it. I was, and it's not perfect, but it's a great foundation to start with. So your challenge this week is to take the Harvard Implicit Bias Test and see what comes up for you. So that's it for this week. Thanks for watching. See you next time.